Imagine if you go to school and they tell you, no, you cannot learn Shakespeare because you have now new writers. You cannot learn Herman Melville or whatever. So why can't you learn traditional architecture?
This episode is brought to you by EFG Hermes One, your one app for investing in more than 35 stock markets worldwide. This episode is also brought to you by Azza Fahmy Jewelry. Welcome again to What I Did Next from A&T Media. I'm Malak Fuad, and we're continuing my conversation with Abdel Wahed El Wakil, the renowned architect. In today's episode, we're going deeper into the world and principles around architecture and how he sees it.
Architecture was defined since Vitruvius. Function, form, and structure. Vitruvius said function was commodity, form was beauty, and he gave the old way of expressing, language changes with time. But I made an analysis of the three, and I'd ask students, for example, or I'd ask who was of the three great masters of the modern movement, Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, and Mies van der Rohe from Germany. So I'd say, who was involved in structuralism, not structure, structuralism, functionalism, and formalist, and structuralist, and functionalist. So everybody would say Frank Lloyd Wright is with form. I'd say no. Frank Lloyd Wright was the structuralist. And then I would explain why. Nature structures. So where does Frank Lloyd Wright retaliation in nature? Because he was in nature and so on, he also said in The Nature of Materials, his book, an organic architecture. But not as a structuralist, but through structuralism. The word is
the key to this.
Ism is when it goes wrong.
Why?
Because he did a big mistake.
Yeah.
Nobody says this about Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah.
Because he worked on the hexagon.
Yes.
Even in Riyadh, you have an hotel that's done by American. It's all on a hexagon based. Because it is the wrong angle. You have the right angle. Why do we call it the right angle? It's 90 degrees. So the angle of man is 90 degrees. And because it's 90 degrees, you have since pharaonic times and through all history, the man exists in a three-dimensional world. He is the cross, the three-dimensional cross within the cube. So these are the principles that go back in history, which are not theories, but they are not facts, principles.
Principles, founding principles.
So the modernist loses principles. So Frank Lloyd Wright started making buildings with a hexagon. So when I was staying at the Intercontinental in Riyadh, it was designed on a hexagon. So the perspective was always distorted because you are used to look at the perspective on a 90 degrees. When you draw even a perspective, you take a vanishing point and you make 90 degrees. When you have a hexagon, you lose the sense of space. You have a quicker vanishing point. So that was his mistake. Now come to Corbusier. He was the formalist. Frank Lloyd Wright was a structuralist. What's the proof? He tried to prove himself as a structural engineer. He did the mushroom column. He did a building on one column. He did the Imperial Hotel in Japan. It was the building that survived the earthquake because he did the foundations like a waiter carrying a tray so that it was movable. So, and when he did his house in Falling Waters, he made a cantilever, and the client at the time, concrete cantilever was scaring. So he built a wall, and when the client came, he saw that the cantilever was supported by the wall, but Frank Lloyd Wright took out a thin cardboard and showed him that the wall wasn't carrying the cantilever. So he always tried to prove himself as a structural engineer. Nobody talks about this in architecture, really. This is something I worked on when I was doing my research. Corbusier was the formalist. So where does he end as in the art world? He ends in Paris. So Frank Lloyd Wright ends in nature because nature structures. Paris was the center of culture where all the painters were, from Matisse to Pablo Picasso, whatever. So he left Switzerland. He was the son of a watchmaker, and he went to Paris. So what did Corbusier do? He tried to make his architecture a sculpture. He ended up doing Grandchamp and doing Chandigarh, and it was so ugly that his advisor in India told him, maybe if you do a sculpture in the piazza, because he wasn't used to the Indian climate. So Corbusier said, yes, that's it. That will correct my architecture. And he did this big hand sculpture in, which is another disease, but we'll go into psychology, which I call fragmentation and obsession. That's a disease in psychology. And modern art does this. The other day, I won an award in Baghdad, and I went to a hotel. And at the front lobby of the hotel, just before you go into the earth, they had a huge three-story finger pointing up like that in brass. Disgusting.
What was the point of it?
Sculpture.
But why? What was it meant to symbolize?
I don't know. I'll tell you why it went distorted. Yeah. And Corbusier is a very good architect, but he became the formalist. So he got interested in artwork, and he painted his buildings with colors, and he did Chalancon as a sculpture, and he got all his buildings as a. But I went to see his buildings when I was living in Paris. They are disgusting. They are sickening. Nobody likes them. And they were very badly built because of the concrete, and concrete it fails the test of time. And then we come to Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe was the functionalist. And that's why his work was vulgarized around the world. The word vulgar in its true sense, which means become popular, from the populace. And it became the true image, whether in Egypt, whether anywhere in the world, of the glass building. And why was Mies van der Rohe the functionalism? Because he said form follows function. You see, even what he said, form follows function. And he tried to make his buildings functional. But there was also the functionalism in it. It's like when he made his Chicago towers, the fire ratings had him cover the steel beams with concrete for the fire rating. So he added on the facade a false steel beam to show that his buildings were...
It completely went against his original...
It's like the Colosseum, where they have columns that are not carrying the building. So it is... What they did is the ism of their ideas, which weren't the true essence of what they're doing. It was dealing with the visual. And that is why in traditional art, and why I like traditional art more than modern art, is that in traditional art, pharaonic art and traditional art, they tell you, we do not draw what we see, because it is not a matter of sensational perception. We draw what we know. So art here is an intellectual exercise more than a sensational exercise. But the way you express your ideas properly is like a mathematician who does an equation. And when you do an equation and you solve a problem, when you say in mathematics, therefore this proves this, or A equals B, and you do it like Fermat's theory when he proved about x cubed and u cubed, then it becomes beautiful, because the mind produces beauty. If you say that the eye can see prettiness, but the mind can see beauty. And the beauty can be not only in a visual thing, but an intellectual thing. And this is a very important thing in art. It's like also, this is something very important. I'll ask you a question. Why in all traditional art, they would never use perspective? It only came and became popular and it became a fashion in the Renaissance. Perspective came in the Renaissance because there was a change of mind. Before the Renaissance, in medieval ages, people followed universal principles according to divine revelation. When the Renaissance came, began the age of individualism. So everybody had a theory and a philosophy, and they dropped the divine principles, and it ended up by becoming secular, and God is dead, and Nietzsche, and so on. Now, here comes the point. When your thinking changes, art changes. So, before, when they used to present art, there was no perspective. Yeah, because you do not produce the illusion of a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional plane. Three-dimension was reserved for sculpture. Now, what made perspective popular is that change from universal principles to personal theory. When you do in perspective, because I used to paint, and if you have a model, you paint the face, the other paints the back. So the teacher comes to see your drawing and evaluates it from seeing how the resemblance of what he saw
from your perspective.
No, from my point of view.
From your point of view.
That's
again the individualized approach.
Yes. So this became my point of view theory. So you create the opinionated society, and people say my opinion.
Now we've taken it to a total extreme.
Yeah, because when you say, the other day I was with the Minister of Culture, and we had discussion, and I told him this is horrible. So, about something, and he said, "Well, it's a matter of taste." And I said, "I'm disappointed for you to say it's a matter of taste. I mean, it's a matter of judgment. If you don't have value principles, you can't even have a beauty contest. You have to have, you give value on proportions.
There are some criteria that are the basis.
Yeah, proportions, color combinations.
When we come back after the break, we'll talk about the importance of the types of material used and the principles of timeless design. This episode is brought to you by EFG Hermes One, your one app for investment across more than 35 stock markets worldwide. With EFG Hermes One, you can buy and sell orders in real time for immediate execution across multiple global markets. You can keep track of your favorite stocks by creating and customizing multiple watch lists and make informed investment decisions with their advanced technical analysis tools to study market trends and investor behavior. So supercharge your financial journey and download the EFG Hermes One app on the Apple App Store and on Google Play and start investing today. Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Abdel Wahed El Wakil. You, as a student, you critiqued and you analyzed and you studied Western architecture, Western ideas of architecture.
Yeah.
But then when you met Hassan Fathi, your eyes were open to more of a traditional way of building. What was it about the traditional way of building that appealed to you? I mean, I know we've talked a lot about it, but why did you feel that this was a direction that you wanted to follow?
It's from my love from childhood on Japanese architecture. It's just, I can't express it. I love it. And when I went to Kyoto, I was, it's every street corner, landscape, their flower arrangement, their packing presence, their gardens.
I understand what you're saying, because when you are in a space or in a culture that is true to itself, which is, I think, another way of saying what you're saying. Japan is true to itself. It lives in its own aesthetic and its own form. So the traditional house that you were building and that you propagated in Egypt to begin with is of Egypt. It's from our grassroots. And this is what you popularized.
You remember recently what happened when we had Corona? Huh? You couldn't travel. Borders were blocked. That was Japan. Japan blocked its borders for 200 years. Yeah, to preserve its tradition. And that is why today Japan is preserving its living treasures, whether it's doing swords, whether it's doing prints, anything, even their food. I went to a tea master ceremony in Japan, and it was an incredible experience, very sacred. For example, he arranged the garden, everything, and everything was planned. And before you go into the house, it's like an ablution. They have this little bamboo dripping water, and you wash your hands. You have to bend down. When you bend down, there's an opening in the bushes where you see the lake. So when your hands touch the water, your vision
is water.
Yeah. And it's the same. It went all the way, even in the courtyard. You had the rocks, and you had the rigged pebbles. And the rocks symbolized the islands of Japan. The rigged pebbles symbolized the sea. And the moss, the greenery that grew on the rocks, symbolized the life in the island. But not only this, the rock was taken from a mountain, which you could see above the wall of the courtyard, so that he brought it into the courtyard. So you have borrowed scenery to make a link with the mountain. It is true magic, because magic is doing the right thing at the right time, at the right place.
And how does it make you feel? Because it's all about how it makes you feel.
It brings out the spiritual aspect in man, because it goes beyond the physical. It is a metaphysical aspiration to bring you out of the physical into the meaning of things. The courtyard in the Arab world was also what? An image of its cosmos. Like Japan, the islands, so on, you had the fountain in the middle, which was the oasis. And around the fountain, you had greenery. So you had the water hole and the oasis. And the rest was all paved stone, which was the desert. So if you take a small piece of land and you can't afford the world, and you give that small piece of land meaning, it expands beyond its physical dimensions. It becomes cosmic. This is the genius of art. And Marcel Proust wrote beautifully about this, that it's not what you see, but how you see things. And I mean, if people have the young that have the time to read the 7 volumes of Marcel Proust, and the last one is on beautiful writings on art.
I want to ask you, talk to me about brick. Why brick? Why is this the material of choice in Egypt?
Not in Egypt, in the world.
In the world.
You have stone and bricks were always used in the history of architecture. Let's say from pharaonic times, all temples were made of stone. All houses were made of bricks. What is so important about bricks for the human being? It's very simple. We are created of mud, earth. So living in an earth building is a symbiosis between our bodies and the building. In fact, we have in Egypt, in Aswan, people come from Sweden to have earth baths in Helwan. If you get treatment, they made you mud bath. Mud is very important for the human body. When I was studying Tai Chi, very important that you are barefoot on earth and hugging a tree to get the energy from heaven. So these things are very important for the human being. What materials you use. In music, since you are asking about bricks and so on, in music, for example, you have instruments. You have instruments made of animal skin. What are they? Drums, tabla. Now, when are you using drums mostly? When there is action. That's why the army always has drums. Because it's from the skin, it's physical. It's physical, okay? The skin is outside. When you want emotions, you use violence. Why violence? They're made from the guts. The strings are made from guts, harpsichord, everything. All the traditional old instruments were made of guts. What are guts? When you say this guy has guts or whatever, guts are the center of feeling. So when you hear violence, you get very sentimental, like a film like Schindler's List or so on. You want to have empathy, you listen to violence. So what about wind instruments? They are very spiritual because of the breath. So what is the best present a king could make to another king in medieval times or in classic time? Give him a present of an organ for the church. So you have the wind, like the Bach, fugues of Bach and so on. They are for the church, the spiritual. So, or you have the flute of the shepherd. And the flute in Islam was made from a reed. And the reed was made for writing. So you have the sound and the word made from the reed. So every instrument, the rock and roll, they have repercussion. So you have copper, you have castanet, you have so on. It's all action, but not like war. It's action of lust, metal.
You've spoken about yourself as being a dissident in the field of architecture. What did you mean by that?
I meant by that I didn't get onto the bandwagon modernity. I don't believe in thing calling modernity. I believe in contemporaneity, which is different. Modernity, if you look at all the books on philosophy of the modernism and postmodernism, it's like you have the styles. Like you have Impressionism, you have Cubism, you have... The West is working in styles, and they work in styles because of what we said before, the loss of universal principles and personal theory, personal vision, opinionated society. In tradition, you don't think like that. For example, let's take Islamic architecture. What it differs from the architecture that we have, like the modern, it's that it's not placed in time. It's timeless. Why is it timeless? Because what is true is timeless. You don't have like the software, updated software or whatever. You have a Bible, you have a Quran, you have the Tao. It's permanent. So there is in life a permanence and change. The things that are permanent are the ones, the truth, that are always repeated every generation. When I have a professor from MIT and they come and make a seminar at the university when I was head of department here in Qatar Foundation, and he comes and he tries to convince the students and says we cannot repeat the past. This is an ignoramus teaching at MIT or Harvard. You never repeat the past. You make the past present, the eternal present. It's not working for today. If the past is true, it defeats time. I mean, imagine if you go to school and they tell you, no, you cannot learn Shakespeare because you have now new writers. You cannot learn Herman Melville or whatever, or Proust, or... This is nonsense. So why can't you learn traditional architecture?
Your philosophy is that there are eternal truths no matter what period we're in or where we live.
I don't have a philosophy. I seek universal principles. I'm like Frank Sinatra. I did it my way.
I did it my way.
That's it. But no philosophy.
That is philosophy.
I'll tell you a very interesting story. Hassan Fathi told me, you want to know how to build for your country, go and see the people. So he told me, go and don't take any money with you. And he got the map and made me go through all the villages up to Aswan. And I had to hitchhike on a truck and a felucca, sleep at a school, so on. So he wanted me to mix with the people. So I came upon a village and they received me very nicely and so on. And I'm coming from Cairo. You know, I'm an architect and so, oh, really, we're trying to build a new mosque. Maybe you can help us. I say, yes, I can help you. I'll do the design for you. Ah, fantastic. Yes, and we'll build it in mud brick, so it will not cost a lot. They looked at me, mud brick? You think you're better than us? I said, what do you mean I'm better? You have mosques in concrete. You don't want us to have in mud? No, we want it in concrete. I told him, what mosques are in concrete? Al-Azhar, Sultan Hassan, the mosques are not in concrete. They're in stone and bricks. They didn't know, but the propaganda, yeah. So the social status of the poor is he wants a house of the master. That means in concrete. So this is where Hassan Fathi failed. He failed in that he did the big mistake of trying to start an architecture from the base, from the poor. No, if you want to start a new architecture, you start it from the top. It filters down to the poor. When the royal family in Egypt, Khedive Ismail, had flirted with France, made the opera, and started bringing, and he brought this gilded furniture from France. In 150 years, it ended up in the farmer's house, in the fallah's house, in the peasant's house. Yeah, so when they have the wedding, they have this gilded furniture, and everybody wants the salon mudahab in Egypt when they get married. This is where Hassan Fatih did the big mistake, because if you want an architecture to filter down, you have to attack the like in history, it was the mosque and the palace. I was making an interview in England, and the woman was trying to be nasty to me, and she said, "You're a hypocrite. You worked for architecture for the poor with Hassan Fatih, and you're doing now palaces in Saudi." She was trying to demean me. So I played along with her. I said, yes, I did architecture for the poor until I became poor. Now I'm doing architecture for the rich, hoping to be rich. And but you see, she didn't realize that the architecture will filter. I did palaces, but I did them with the materials that the poor could afford. Like the pharaohs, their palaces were of mud, not of stone. That's why you don't have any existing today. You only have the monuments of the pyramids and the temples.
How has this fight shaped you? Because you have had so many obstacles in your career, whether you were working in Saudi and you were trying to get buildings built in a certain way. How has it shaped you as a person, the constantly being challenged in this way?
That's beautiful. It reminded me of Saint-Exupéry. He said you should love the enemy. Why? I said, because the enemy gives you shape. How did he explain it? He said, the ship, the enemy for the ship is the sea, the waves. So it shapes the keel of the ship to attack the waves. So love the enemy because it shapes you. It's like a car. You have an engine. If the road is slippery, you won't go anywhere. If you want to burn rubber, as they say, Americans say, you have to have friction between the asphalt and the car.
Thanks for joining me today. I'm Malak Fuad, and this show has been produced by Chirag Desai. You can leave us a comment on any of the social media platforms on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And let us know what you think of the show. You can also find us, of course, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course on YouTube. I'll be back again next week with a special encore episode with film producer Mo Hefzi. I hope you can join me then.